Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin, and we are going to have a discussion show today. We've got a very special guest, so we're going to talk about all kinds of things. Looking forward to it. Let's say hi to our panelists, then we'll meet our guest, and then we'll get into the content. Joining us today, we've got Bonnie. Bonnie, what's going on?
Hi, happy Friday. I'm very excited to be here. You sent me a message on Slack today and said, are you going to join us today? And I was like, yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah. I would not miss it.
Not miss it, for sure, for sure. We were talking a little bit about your plant life going on back there before the show started. Always just
proud.
so fresh and strong. I love it.
You got to say it. You got to say it, Bonnie.
What is my green screen?
Your green screen.
You're about like 2.5 plants away from having full green screen there. I like it.
Hey, it's summer. It's the growth season. I have a lot of new growth, and I have some more plants yeah, there's a lot of new growth. There's like, you see the little ones in here? Aren't they cute?
Oh yeah. Very nice.
Stay tuned.
Have you named them all? Isn't that like a thing you name your plants?
I think I should name this one, this big majestic one, Misko. What do you think?
There we go. All right. Done.
Please don't kill it. Please don't kill it, Bonnie.
Right. Alyssa's with us. Alyssa, what's going on?
Doing well. So excited for this episode. Glad to be here.
Yes. And our guest, Misko Hevery. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with all you exciting people.
Yes.
Love the jokes. Love the bad jokes. I just love it. Keep going.
We do have a few of those. Mike Brocky has a bunch as well. He wasn't able to make it today, but he would have added to that as well for sure.
He was so bummed. I was like, Mike, what could you possibly have that's more important than Papa Misko? And he said family, and I was like, oh man, I can't argue with that.
No, specifically
This is the one thing I can't argue with.
It's specifically kids, right? Like your kids that's it. That's the pinnacle. So he was like, the kids have a thing. I was like, say no more. Say no more.
Like, yeah, that's a good reason.
We told him he could use his mobile device and get in, but
while he's out and about.
For sure.
I remember having a whole conversation at a conference a couple years ago with like, hey, can we get away with calling him Papa Misko? Like, he is the father of Angular. And I don't think any of us actually technically asked him. We just started calling him Papa Misko, but he didn't get mad, so we got away with it. So is it okay, Misko? We should probably ask you if it's okay.
Yes.
We've been calling you this for years. He doesn't mind.
Yeah, maybe we can fill our viewers in who might not know, like, what does that mean? Misko, that you're the father of Angular.
He made it up.
It's just somebody had to be it.
I didn't make it up. I passed it along. Can you tell us the story?
I don't know. Actually, no. I think it's because, people were like, hey, what do you want to call yourself? And I just was like, I don't know, father of Angular. And then you somehow turned that into Papa Misko, which I think is cute.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a term of endearment.
Oh, okay.
But it's because AngularJS kind of started with you, right?
Yeah, AngularJS was kind of a project I was doing on the side. And actually, it wasn't meant to be a framework. It was meant to have people who are maybe not developers, but like, they're enough to be like HTML, so not a, proper development code, more like a declarative development code. People like that to be able to like do simple web apps. And that's why so much of it is declarative. So much of it is in just, adding extra tags to HTML, because that's kind of its roots.
Were you upset when it branched away from those roots? Or
I don't think you're ever upset. It's like saying, like, are you upset that your child grew up to something else than what you intended for it to be? It's like, you're never upset. You're like always proud.
I remember when I first found AngularJS, and I didn't know anything about change detection, so I was just went a little crazy with ng this and ng that and ng all the things. And then I learned later, like, you should not, like, don't go crazy with it. But I remember I was very excited about this functionality. I'm still excited, Misko. I think it's great.
You're just an exciting person.
But, yeah.
Or excitable person?
Exactly.
Both.
No, I'm excited. No, I legit. I'm not excited about everything. I mean, I'm legit excited about Angular. Like, I really love it. And I don't want to get all mushy.
I don't know.
Anything,
I think 99% of the time when I was like with you in person, you were excited about most everything. So
most everything.
Most everything.
Samantha told me a couple years ago. She said, "Mom, you should get an Angular tattoo." And I was like,
Ooh.
I'm not going to get a tattoo, but if I did, I would probably get an Angular.
That would be
That'd
it.
probably be it. I
Like, you don't know
would
if Angular is
join you
going
in
to be this cool forever. So maybe something else will come along and it will be.
I'm
my new
sorry,
favorite
but in
thing,
my heart, it will always be this cool.
like, I have not seen anything yet coming along to knock Angular out of my favorite spot. I don't see it. So
No, it's not. Yeah.
Well, it's about the memory, right? It's like the memory of that moment that you're capturing there with that tattoo. So it doesn't have to be something that's like going to live forever, goes alongside with that tattoo.
It's
You're
a
just
tattoo,
capturing the
Justin.
moment. The tattoo is, okay, yeah, it is kind of permanent. Okay.
No, I'm with you though. I'm with you.
You know, it's like at that moment in time, it's like if you got a tattoo of your baby's feet, right? It's like they're not always going to be that size, but you captured that moment. Okay, so before we get into more of the Angular stuff, I've got to ask you, Misko, because before you got really into the AngularJS stuff, started that, you did a lot of stuff around like unit testing. Is that correct? I think I saw a lot of blog posts and things like that.
Yeah, that was my previous life. So my previous life was when I got to Google, I was working on what eventually became Google Pay. It was called Checkout back in the day. And I was trying to like figure out, how to be productive on the team. And it was so confusing. And I felt like I did not know what I was doing. And then one day I kind of figured out that maybe it's not me that's having trouble understanding the code. Maybe it's just the code is bad. And that's kind of what I kind of got into, like, okay, I need to clean this up. I need to kind of make the situation better. And it's about the same time when there was another gentleman who worked with me called Adam Abrams, and he was into TDD, and he kind of showed me, and I was like, I had an epiphany. I was like, oh, I get it. I know what needs to be done. I know how to fix this thing. And so I started doing a lot of refactoring on the existing code base to kind of clean it up. But also I kind of went into this mode of like, let's teach people how to fish, right? Mm-hmm. The thing I kind of understood was that the reason people don't write testable code is because they don't understand how to do it, right? Yeah. They often make an excuse, say like, oh, testing is not worth it, or testing is problematic, or whatever. Like, those are excuses. Really what it comes down to is, I've never done it, and therefore I don't know how to do it, right? Like, you wouldn't expect people to just magically know these things. And this is the kind of interesting thing that was about testing that I kind of discovered was that, and you can shut me up if I talk too much, was I discovered was that when you ask a person like, do you know C++ or something? And people wouldn't have a issue saying, no, I don't know that language, but I'm sure I can pick it up. Like, nobody ever felt bad about saying, I don't know language X. But if you ask them about like, do you know how to do testing? They would be like, oh, well, it'd be embarrassing to say, I don't know how to do that. So like, I'm going to lie and I'm going to say, and so testing was this thing where like, everybody claimed they knew how to do it, but nobody actually knew how to do it. And so that's what I did for a while, is I just went for like 3 or 4 years. I would go around and I would write blog posts on this topic. I did talks, and I basically was trying to convince people that like, this is a good idea. And fast forward like, a decade, and testing is the thing that everybody does, right? Yeah. Like, it's not a thing with debate anymore. Right? Maybe we have a debate whether we should do this kind of test versus that test, but like, nobody's really debating whether testing is a good idea. Right? But like, if you go back 10 years, like, people had these debates. We had these debates of like whether testing was worth its trouble, right? And all these things that came with it. And so because I was into testing so much, when AngularJS got kind of put together, one of the key things of it was make sure testing was available from the day one, right? Like, the testing was built in. It was not like an afterthought. It was, the whole thing was designed with testing in mind. And I think it was a big differentiator back then.
For sure. I've got a really cool story I want to share. So before I was into the AngularJS stuff, right, at a previous project, I did stuff in C# and PHP, and did a lot of unit testing and stuff in there, right, and got into the whole test-driven development thing. And so I had seen articles and things like that of yours at that time prior to getting into AngularJS. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, was because I actually remember reading and going over some of those articles to go down that path. I did something similar in really getting into trying to teach TDD and the benefits of it. And I think one of the things that you kind of allude to that I found that's valuable for it is it's like, you learn how to write code that becomes testable, right? And that's kind of the key of going down through that exercise, is not necessarily to, do do the TDD all the time or to do the testing. It's the fact that you come out of it understanding this is how I should architect and craft my code because it's ready to be testable. And now that's the whole point of it, is to make it, that way. So, but yeah, it was really neat. And then when the project I was on, we started to decide, do we want to go with like AngularJS at the time? There's a couple other ones that we were looking at. I think Durandal at the time was one. And I think that the testing around AngularJS and the fact that, like you said, it was there, what helped one of those deciding factors to go with AngularJS at the time. So it's cool.
Yeah, what I like about testing is that when you do it right, and when the code is testable, it's actually better code. Like it's arguably better, right? And so it's almost like a test that you rite of passage that you manage to pass. If your code manages to pass the test, then it actually is a code that's better designed and more flexible and easier to work with than if you just put something together and it's not testable.
And if you write tests every day, it does get a lot easier. In the beginning, it's like, I can't get anything done. But once you get used to it, it actually really isn't that bad. It's like doing the dishes. If you do it every, it's not that bad.
You should talk to my kids about doing the dishes. But it's like, driving a car, right? The first time you have to drive a car, it's like, don't talk to me. I'm so stressed out. It's too much. And then, you drive for a while and then you're like, you can be sending SMSs. You shouldn't be, but like, you can do it, right? Like you can drive and like send an SMS and talk on a phone. And it's like, it's kind of possible. Bad idea, but like it's possible.
Don't listen to him, you guys. Don't do that.
My point is that your brain gets better at it. I'm not saying it's a good idea or it's legal, but it's something that you can actually get to eventually.
It gets easier.
It gets easier,
Okay,
yes.
So you were really into unit testing, teaching that, making sure that was prevalent. And as you moved into the Angular realm, making sure that was prevalent there. What's the next step? I don't know if we want to save that for later or if we could are you?
Oh, you're fast forwarding like 10 years into the present. A lot of stuff is slipping over, but sure.
If you had like a bookmark of testing, I didn't know if it was like, well, I'm actually on this team that's writing tests, or if I didn't know if it was relevant.
I don't want us to skip to now yet because I do want to talk about what's next for you, but I want to stop for a minute at this whole very, can we say, controversial decision to completely turn AngularJS on its ear and redo it with Angular. This was not, I would assume this was not a simple decision for you because there was backlash. Yeah. But and I think it was a great decision. I think it was worth it. But can you kind of help us, give us a picture of you guys, like the team, when you made that decision? Did you know they were going to get mad?
Well, I mean, who's going to get mad? The external world? No, I did not expect that.
But I say that with love because I really think that the reasons why you did everything you did was amazing. Because it was so it's just so much cleaner. Like we took everything that we learned with AngularJS and then made Angular, and it's just beautiful. So it was worth it. But was it a hard decision for you?
I think it was a naive decision back in the day. So I don't think it was hard. It's like, we'll just redo it and make it better, not realizing like what it actually means to take the community along, right? And how difficult it was. I mean, the decision was mainly because AngularJS I kind of put together without actually knowing JavaScript and what it entails and the benefits and costs and trade-offs, etc. None of that stuff was really in the calculus when it got made. And also what wasn't in there was type safety, right? And something like TypeScript didn't really exist back in the day.
Right.
And so one thing we learned is that when people adopted AngularJS, large teams had troubles because it was extremely difficult to type. We had this thing called Closure Compiler within Google, but even Closure Compiler was having issues with it because every cool feature I discovered in JavaScript, I was like, let's give it a try, see how it works out. So the typing was hard, and then Closure likes to do this thing called minification, and of course that was hard because of the way minification works. And so it's almost like somebody wrote AngularJS in a way to make sure that Closure's life was miserable. And so everything that Clojure was trying to do to make teams productive, whether it's add type safety or whatever, Angular was written in a way that actually hindered this particular process. And so we had a lot of teams who were like, we love Angular, but like this is so hard, and it's essentially write only. Like people can write Angular code, but then everybody's afraid to touch it because, you know, anything you change could have an effect far, far away. And so this was kind of the motivation behind kind of Angular. Was like, okay, we learned all these things, and we understand that we need to make this for large teams. How do we make this for large teams so that it has type safety, et cetera? TypeScript was about to come out. TypeScript clearly has a better type system than Clojure compiler, so we adapted that. But we did it in a way where we could still get the minification from Clojure compiler and so on. So this kind of was the motivation behind it. Now, we thought we were going to do an awesome thing, so we came on the stage, podium, and be like, oh, look at all this thing. We're going to change everything. And everybody was like, what?
I was there. I was in the audience. I remember.
I know, me too.
There were tombstones for all my favorite features of AngularJS, and it was like, rip this, rip that. And
I was such a nerd. I didn't know that it was going to be on YouTube, and I was like trying to write down everything you said because I didn't realize that everything was being recorded and it would be on YouTube. And so I was like there in the front row with my little notebook.
As you were talking about everything that was going to like go away, I was like, what's left? Like, I was so confused.
But I think it's like, you know, a couple things like, you know, it's good because people were passionate about AngularJS, right? It showed that they were committed to it. They were using it. They really enjoyed it.
Because we had to talk our bosses into it too.
Right. And so it's like the love and the passion or the, you know, the usage of that kind of led to their concern over that. Right. And so you can kind of look at it and say, well, that's good because they were invested and they do like this thing of AngularJS. Right. But then I think also on the flip side from, you know, our end, it's like, I'm sure the majority of us sit there working on app code and going, man, if I could just rewrite this right now, I'd be in a happier state. Like if I could rebuild my app, right, I'd write it fresh. I know all this new stuff. And that's essentially what, you know, the AngularJS to Angular kind of was, right? So we're all sitting here going, man, I wish I could do this to my app code. But then somebody else does it and you're like, so I don't know, kind of take it all in. That's my perspective.
I gained a lot of respect for, I mean, I had a lot of respect for the Angular team, but I gained even more respect for the Angular team because when that happened, when Angular 2 came out and the feedback from the community was harsh. It was like, you guys changed everything and now we have to, but I really like the fact that the Angular team really continued to stay plugged in. Like they still were like, we want to make you happy. Like we want your feedback. And even when it was like, you know, really hard, they like still were like so open to, you know, we want to improve, we want to make this better, we want to make things easier. And that never changed. And like, it's kind of, I would imagine like if I did all this work and shared it with people and they yelled at me, I would be like, fine, go away then. But still like the Angular team has been so plugged into the community and I love that because you built it for what you needed it for, but then everybody else is like, well, I need to do this and this and this. And you guys just have really tried to capture all of that. And it's amazing.
Yeah.
So you kind of alluded to it earlier about like the watching your kids grow up and it just kind of goes and you're happy for it, right? But what's it like to have started this code base, right? And then you know, drive direction on it, but you're handing it over and you're having other people now change it and alter it. Like, did you have a moment where you kind of had to figure out a way to cope with that it's going out of your hands and a lot of stuff's going to change and work with that? Or how did that play out?
I didn't really have trouble letting go. I think I had more of a trouble of like, people were saying things that I should have picked up on and understood, but I didn't until way later. And then by the time I understood what they were trying to tell me, I was like, it's a bit too late, my fault. I think that's kind of a harder thing to kind of figure out, you know, like when people ask questions, and you're like, well, that's a strange question. Why are you asking that? But then you like don't drill deep enough to really understand that. And then later on, you're like, oh, I understand why they were asking that question because we were not on the same page because of X, Y, and Z, right? And because of that, now we're in a suboptimal location. And yeah, that's tricky. That's the hardest part of the whole thing. what I call it is that people ask, like, do you have regrets about past? And I said, well, there's two kinds of regrets, right? There's regrets, which is that, like, even if you did it over, given the information you had, you would still make the same decision. It might be suboptimal decision, but like you just simply didn't have the information at the time, right? And so it's hard to be regretful about that thing. Like, yeah, now I know later that like I should have done something else, but like given the information that existed at the time, that was the smartest thing to do, even although it turned out later that it wasn't, right? And so even if you relive this, you're really going to end up in the same place. There's a different kind of regret, which is like the information was there, you just weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a tougher one because it's like, I should have known better. Okay. Like all the pieces were there, but for whatever reason, I didn't connect them. And a lot of times what I kind of realize is that you don't connect all the pieces because you're just exhausted. You're like, I'm just too tired and I'm not going to drill into it because it's not worth the trouble. And
because there's only so many hours in the day, right?
Yeah, like because there's only so many hours, right? But those are kind of frustrating because those are the ones where you're like, if I only dug a little deeper, I would figure this out and we wouldn't, I would have saved myself so much time later.
Yeah, they hit internally, right?
Yeah.
You feel like you could have controlled that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of an empowering because if you say like I made the best decision that I could with the information that I had available to me, because I've known a lot of people in growing up in my life who get and sometimes me, like, you're scared to make a decision either way because you don't know if this is the right thing, or taking a chance, or leaving a job for a new job, or like me moving to Europe, like this is scary stuff. And so sometimes people just don't do anything because they don't really know if they're making the right decision. So I think to say like, hey, I made the best decision with the information that I had. And then if I get new information, I'm allowed to pivot and say, okay, we need to do something different. And I think just that mindset is very empowering because it's like, I can just go ahead and do what I need to do. And if it, we can always change it later. Just start.
Yeah. Starting is the hardest thing.
Yeah, it is. Especially when you don't know exactly how it's going to turn out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we went from this moment where things were announced that things were going to change, right, up to, let's fast forward to the launch party at Google, where you actually went live with Angular, right, or Angular 2. I was there. I was lucky to be there, watch the balloons drop and everything like that. What was that moment like? Like, were you excited? Were you stressed because it was going live? Like, what were your emotions at that time?
I was exciting. Stress is a funny thing, right? Stress is like the delta between your expectations and reality, right? So if you're stressed out, it's because you expect something else than what actually is happening, and a lot of it could be fixed by adjusting your expectations. And then you're like, okay, you're expecting this to be hard, and therefore it is. Anyways, but I mean, at that point, most of this stuff was already, it wasn't me, it was more of a team, right? Like team had all the pieces, there was a lot of different people on the team who did different things, whether it was form routing, animations, and so on. And so there's a lot of different people who were kind of working on their individual pieces, and they already had it. At that point, I was more like kind of worried about like, is it cohesive, right? Is it something that is consistent with kind of the overall vision? But not the day-to-day things have slowly been taken by others, right? And that's so exciting and nice to have an awesome team you can rely on and work with.
Speaking of the awesome team, is there anybody that you're really going to miss?
I'm going to miss everybody.
I was like, he can't just say a name, Bonnie. Like,
I know.
Everyone else back at home is going to be like, thanks.
We had him on Angular Nation a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, is it true? Is Igor really mean to you, Misko? You can tell us.
Not.
Like, blink if you need help.
He's not. Everybody is super awesome. The thing I always tell people is, when you come to a company and you're like, I want to work for Google. And Google's like, okay, great. Like, we have a need at this project X over here, so we're just going to assign you to X. It's very different with Angular because everybody who's Angular actually requested to be on Angular, right? Like people come out and be like, oh, can I get to work on Angular team? And then part of it, I think, is just this public persona that Angular has, right? But part of it is just because it's open source and it's well known. And so people really want to work there. So my point is that all the people who work on Angular are there because of their personal choice. And because of that, like there's a lot more passion than you would expect from just a random team somewhere. And it shows. And so I love working with every one of them on a team, and they're just an awesome team and a super passionate team. Yeah.
Has it changed much from like AngularJS days to now as far as like the numbers, the team dynamic? Like, has it gone through its own changes as well?
It has. AngularJS days was, wild west. We just did whatever we wanted to, didn't know what we were doing. And I think over the time, it has become a lot more of a, proper project with a lot more processes, management overhead and all that stuff to make it into a proper project. The biggest thing is that, once you become like so big and so many people depend on you, you can't just like change things. Like back in the AngularJS days, we had this thing. We're like, oh, let's just break stuff. Like we only have 3 customers. We just fly over there in person and fix them, right? It's not a problem. But now it's like, well, you have 1 million customers and it's hard, right? And you can't just go and do it like that. So it's a lot more. I joke that, basically Angular has graduated. It is a teenager now. It's on its own. And there is surprisingly, back in the AngularJS days, you could have a lot of influence and change the direction of the project because there's not a lot of people who depended on it, right? But because there's so many people who depend on Angular these days, especially within Google, there's 2,000 projects using it. You can't just break them, right? And you have to take them along. And so the kinds of big changes you can do are much more restricted. So I joke that, Angular has kind of grown up and it's on its own now.
I imagine it's nice to have so much success, but it's also probably pretty challenging to work like with all of that. Like everybody's like looking at you and paying attention to you. Is it hard to work with all that attention? I imagine it's got its challenges.
I don't really usually think about it unless I'm on the show with you and you pick on me.
Yeah, she does that. She does that.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? That people kind of know something. Like every once in a while, like I have this weird thing where like I'm in Gap or something, and somebody recognizes me and like comes up to me.
But at home, you're just a regular guy. Like your kids, your family doesn't think you're fancy at all.
No, they don't. They make me do dishes.
So does it not
keeps you real?
Do you not get hit by it at times, just internally sitting there thinking about, oh my gosh, all of this came about?
It's I don't think about it, but B, it's also kind of weird numbers to think about. Like, what does it mean, 1 million people using a product? I don't know. It's just a big number. But like, I have no idea how to really even think about it or internalize it. I just like the technology, so I just play with that. And
all right,
and,
So does that mean that when you started the whole thing and you got down the road where now all of a sudden all these businesses and all these companies and all these people are depending on that code that you kicked off, like it didn't really set in as a stress of like, oh crap, the stuff
but what is interesting?
Should we be able to cope with that?
What is interesting is like I'm buying a ticket on United, and every once in a while I open the inspector. I'm like, oh, is there Angular in there? And a lot of times you find it in, and you go like, oh, look, this code because of me. Like I'm buying a ticket on the platform that's running because of the work I've done.
Yeah,
I should be getting a discount, right?
Oh, that's why you got to build in the backdoor discount. Anywhere my framework is, there's a secret code.
But yeah, it's fun. It's nice to know that. Whether it's SpaceX or Tesla or United, you go there and you use their product, and you're like, that's me. That's like running on me. I had something to do with it.
So no stress about the fact that like if it goes down, that's me. I had something to do with it, right?
That too.
He's like, I don't think about that side of it, but thanks for bringing.
Well, yeah, exactly. Why are you reading it for me?
Well, I'm just curious, like I ask people in the open source community a lot, like that question of like when your code starts to be used by all these entities and all these people, and like does that creep in, mentally, anything that you have to deal with, or if it does, how do you deal with it, right? Like, how do you?
I guess I'm just ignorant.
It's good though. It's good. Yeah. Ultimately, it's it's open source. It's something that if something needs to be changed, anybody can get in there and change it, fork it, whatever, right? So,
yes, it's true. You just pushed up one of my buttons here, which is that people make a PR and then they're like, "Why aren't you merging it in? Like, it takes 2 seconds to merge it." I'm like, it does not take 2 seconds, man. If it was 2 seconds, it would be merged.
But I think in terms of like, look, if somebody said, I used to talk about this with AngularJS and stuff with like, well, what if it's changing? What now we're exposed? Well, it's open source. Like, you can pull that code right now, a snapshot of that code, and you go your own direction, right?
Yep.
So
It's
not like something in the past where you have like maybe like .NET code in the past or something that's sealed that you can't alter or change, or you can't control the ultimate outcome. This is something that you can. It's ideal if you can get somebody else to work on it and improve it. But if push came to shove, you could always just grab it and go along your way. You're not stuck, right?
Yep.
And the same thing kind of with TypeScript. When people were starting to adopt TypeScript, and it was like, I don't know if I want to adopt TypeScript. Well, it just transpiles down to JavaScript. So you have JavaScript at the end. So you're not in a bad boat, right? You're still able to get out and do whatever you need to do. You're not locking yourself into something, I guess is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, JavaScript, TypeScript is awesome in this respect. And I'm going to go on a tangent. You can bring it back later.
Yay! I love tangents.
And that is that I think the world has gone through this thing of like, oh, we need to build apps in the web and we have JavaScript. Oh, JavaScript sucks. Let's reinvent a better language, right? And people have tried this over and over and they failed miserable every single time. And I think what it comes down to is that reinventing language means that your new language has to be compatible with existing stuff. And I have a simple acid test, right? And my acid test is like, look, if you're going to reinvent a language, let's say there is an interface. Can you implement the interface in one language, but have the implementation of the interface in the other language? If you can do that and it all interoperates, great. You've managed to not be an island, right? But every single one of those things failed this particular test because what they do is they come up with different set of semantics, and as a result, it doesn't work. And TypeScript is the only one who kind of embraced it and said, we love you for all your faults, and we're just gonna, not mess with you. You are what you are. We're just gonna add a type system to it, right? And we're not gonna try to fix it, and we're not gonna try to make it better. We're just gonna take it the way it is. And I think that's the huge differentiator why TypeScript is successful and all the other cases have essentially failed. And the other thing is that I think the world has gone through this of like, we're just gonna replace JavaScript with something else. And they failed, right? And then on the end of it, they're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to learn to love you, and big hug, and kind of move on. And I think the same exact things right now happening with frameworks, because all these frameworks are saying DOM sucks. We're going to insulate you from the DOM. We're going to pretend the DOM is not here, and just and Angular has some of that too. And I think the new level is going to be, you know what? Just learn to love DOM. It is what it is. It has its faults. But just learn to love it, embrace it, and move on. And so I think there's going to be a second wave of this coming.
You know what is so funny about what you just said? It hits this tune, I love bird watching. And I was reading a book about people, like bird watchers who hate squirrels, and how to get rid of squirrels. They're eating all your seeds. What are you going to do about it? And literally you get through this whole book, and the very end of it is at the end, you just accept the squirrels as part of the bird watching experience, and you're feeding them too. And I was like, whoa, it's like Misko is an expert bird watcher over here with frameworks and languages.
What's the most amazing thing, Alyssa? I was talking to Alex Rickabaugh last week about the DOM, and he used an example. We were talking about content protection, and the example he used actually a squirrel. I did not make that up.
There's something with squirrels and DOM. I don't know what it is.
And the funny thing is, we did this DOM, Samantha and I did this DOM course. That's what we were talking to Alex about. And we actually made an animated DOM. It's a shiny silver robot, and his name is Dom. And because, Samantha's doing 3D animation now. So, so we have an Angular course with a shiny robot named Dom. And Excellent. He builds the DOM. And sometimes if your code is messy, he gets stressed out. Yeah. And then you guys are talking about Dom and squirrels, and I'm just like, this is hilarious.
So you're saying we came full squirrel? That one's for Brocky. That one's for Brocky. Yeah, it's interesting because, like, I mean, you could think about something like jQuery, right? Which is embracing the DOM, but just helping us work with the DOM, right? Some more. So same sort of concept, and that's long lived and everything. So yeah, I really do like that. You know, the fact that we're adding tooling to help us be more successful with the language that's there, right? Yeah.
Is that why I remember vividly, because my team, I don't know why, do not ask, had decided to go when Angular 2 came about. We were going to make the change from AngularJS to Angular 2, but we were going to do it with CoffeeScript instead of TypeScript. And there was a little while where we're like, yeah, it's going to be possible. And then there was like a very moment in time where it was like, nope, not possible. Like, we need to use TypeScript. And so is that why that decision was made to not open the floodgates and let anyone use anything, or?
It's a lot more complicated.
Okay.
Question.
Sorry, I just assumed it was that reason. So
no. Like, my goal was always to make typing optional. Like, it was never meant, like, JavaScript. Angular, the way it ended up is, like, you have to use TypeScript, right? You can't really use it in any other way. I mean, you could in theory, but in practice, it doesn't really work out. And my goal was always to make it the TypeScript optional and not force it upon you. The trouble was that at the same time, somebody came to me and they also said, you should also make Dart version of Angular. And I didn't like that, basically because of what I just said, which is that Dart isn't really a thing that plays nicely with existing JavaScript. But, you know, we had to do what we had to do. And so part of it put us down on this path of very strong compilation. And the reason why Angular is, or AOT compiled today, it has a lot to do because somebody said you should do Dart as well. It was a short-lived thing, and Dart is gone from Angular. But nevertheless, you know, many of these things stayed behind and are coming up. And so decisions that were made a long time ago, you end up living with them. The outcome of all that is that Angular is extremely strongly coupled to AOT, right? Ahead of time compilation. And the reason for that is because, well, Dart doesn't really have reflection. And so AOT was the only thing you could do in Dart. Anyways, that's a long-winded answer, I think.
It's perfect.
Alyssa got everybody in the chat started with the squirrels.
Squirrels.
Speaking of chat, we have really good questions going in the chat, and I feel bad because we're not paying attention to them because we're so focused on you. But we should probably queue up some of the questions. But I also, because I think we can probably run through the whole rest of the hour with questions easily. But I also kind of want you to just talk to us a little bit, because I was shocked. When I saw the announcement that you were leaving the Angular team, and I will always love you, Misko, for what you've given us. So you totally will go with love. But again, as far as like making big decisions, it had to have been a really exciting opportunity for you to walk away at the height of your massive success. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. Yes, it was a very, very hard decision because, you know, I consider Angular to be my baby, and you know, like, is it like me abandoning the baby or what it is? And I kind of, my analogy is that, you know, actually it's a teenager now and it's good on its own, and, you know,
and
it's time for it to move out of the house. The realization I had, right, the big thing was that I'm almost the crazy person with crazy ideas of how you could this and that. And I never really, I guess these days I pay attention to, like, well, how do we get people on board with it, right? But a lot of it, like, for example, going from AngularJS to Angular 2 was like, oh, we could do so much better. Let's just do it, right? Not really paying attention to, like, yes, but like people will have to rewrite and so much of it will be, you know, and so on, right? And so the thing is, I have all kinds of crazy ideas in my head, and I realize, like, a lot of these ideas I cannot realize because Angular is so popular, right? Like, it is not fundamentally possible for me to go and change something fundamental about how Angular works, because, like, the end result would be that, you know, so many people would be unhappy and it would break things and so on and so forth, right? And so Angular is kind of its own thing right now. Like it's its own trajectory, and we make sure that we bring the community along. But that also means that there's restrictions on what we can do on the framework, right? And so when this opportunity came along, it was like, hey, let's look at the problem from a different angle. Like, what could the world look like? And that just kind of tickled me, like, ooh, I could try different things.
You cannot keep Misko in the box.
Yeah, exactly, and not keep me in the box. And not only that, but also like, exercise part of my brain that I would haven't exercised before, like how to build a company and how to help with these things. And so all of that just looked super enticing. Yes, Bonnie?
You can dance again.
I could dance again. Okay. I don't think you want to see me dance. My dancing days are over. So that's what I'm kind of excited about in it. Specifically, the problem that we're trying to solve with BuilderIO is, I think the frameworks are having these arguments about who's the fastest, but I think they're missing the point, because all frameworks are fast enough, right? Like, if your web app is slow, but I mean the runtime slow, it is not because the choice of the framework you've chosen, right? It's probably because you did something suboptimal and you can fix it and rearrange it, right? All frameworks fundamentally are fast enough. But there's a distinction between fast enough at runtime versus fast enough for startup time, right? And again, here, all the frameworks are like, oh, look how quick we are at starting. But what happens in practice is that they bring along so much JavaScript code that your startup time really has nothing to do with the framework you have chosen. It has all to do with how big your site is. And the bigger your site becomes, the harder and harder it is to keep the startup time reasonable. And so the thing I want to focus on, right, the thing I want to attack and solve is not like how to make the frameworks faster, but how do we make the startup of the application faster? Right? Because that's the thing that really matters, especially for e-commerce websites, right? You go to Twitter and somebody says, oh, you have to buy these crazy latest shoes or something. I don't know, I don't shop, but like, I imagine this is how it works. And then you click on a link, and then the e-commerce website takes forever to come up, and you're like, you know what? I don't really need those shoes, and you move on, right? And so a sale doesn't happen.
No.
And so
that's literally how shopping online with me works. Like, I think about half the things I don't end up buying because I'm like, what was I doing? Like, yeah.
So the thing I want to solve with BuilderIO, right, is specifically the startup time. And I'm going to say that all current generation of frameworks basically don't focus on this particular problem. They all claim, but I jokingly say these are marketing claims. But at the end of the day, it doesn't happen, because if you look at the websites, the amount of JavaScript that's downloaded is ridiculous. I went to Amazon the other day and I just kind of like poked around. And Amazon downloads something like 3 megabytes worth of JavaScript. And I wish I would be joking about the next part. I've actually discovered that they download different versions of React at the same time. Like, I think I found like 4 copies of React with different versions of the framework downloaded into the client.
Does that help anybody? Who's that helping?
I don't think that helps anybody. I just imagine that, there's a lot of different groups working on the site, right? And so you're responsible for the carousel on the top, and you're responsible for the ad, and you're responsible for the detailed view, right? And these frameworks all solve it in a different way, have different versions, and they not in sync, and so they push it to the client, and the client just has to deal with it. Like, it's just craziness. And if you push multiple copies of the framework to the client, and if you download the ridiculous amount of code that has to go with it, it doesn't matter what framework you choose, you're just going to be slow, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing. And so the thing I'm trying to focus now on is like, the only way to make your site fast is to just download nothing, right? The name of the game is like, how do I download the least amount of JavaScript possible? Because anything you download is going to make your life more difficult, and it's going to make the application eventually not scale. And that's the problem that I want to attack with BuilderIO. And I think that if we attack it, it's going to change the way people think about how to build websites, right? We currently, when we build websites, we are in this. By the way, shut me up if I'm talking too much here.
You're the guest. Misko.
The way we currently build websites or the web apps is kind of the same way we used to build desktop apps, right? Like when you're building a desktop app, you don't think about lazy loading. You don't think about like, what does it mean? You just like clobber things together until you have an app and then you kind of done, right? But with web apps, it's different because like you have to worry about like, how do I download all this stuff? How do I bundle all this stuff? How do I make this thing run fast and not download everything at the beginning? And the problem is frameworks aren't really helping with this particular problem, right? I mean, all the frameworks are like, oh yeah, of course we have lazy loading for the routes. Like, yeah, that's nice, but you're making me download everything. So let me give you an example. Like there is a add to checkout button, right, on your page. You come to the site and the framework has to download that code for adding to checkout. Like, yes, but like most people don't click that, and they certainly won't click it immediately at the very beginning. It's going to be a while before they browse around and decide this is what they want. And then eventually maybe they'll, 10% of it were actually added to the checkout button. But yet that code had to get downloaded at the very, very beginning when the application bootstrapped, right? And it's not just the checkout, it's settings, it's login page, it's logout page, right? Like, and the list just goes on and on and on and on. And the next thing you know, you're downloading 3 megabytes of code that you need to get yourself bootstrapped. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
And it's everything like when you talk about that checkout button, it's not just like what the checkout button does, but what it kicks off, right? So
That's
if
right.
it does 3 different things, and then that has dependency, like all that comes along with it because we're delivering the entire checkout button and the behavior of it, right?
Well, because what it really comes down to is the click listener, right? Like there is some button somewhere that has a click listener attached to it. And that click listener has to be attached early on at the very, very, very beginning, because you never know, you might click on it, right? But that click listener is a function closure, and that function closure closes over the behavior of the listener. And so you are forced to download all this code, attach it somewhere, be super, super eager about the whole thing, even though like nobody might not click on it, right?
Right, yeah.
And the thing is that because it's a closure that closes over its behavior, that behavior has to be downloaded. And then that behavior probably has other closures that close off other things, right? And then it's like you're pulling on a sweater. And the next thing you know, 3 megabytes on a client.
I'm going to stand out here for a minute because I want to pull something together and why your ability to tackle this problem is so strong, because I automatically see like this is what you did when you were working back in AngularJS to bring to a data binding to the DOM, right? The same sort of things that you were thinking about and solving to pull off that now comes into the mix of that experience and that knowledge of what you're talking about right now.
Yep. And I think a lot of the reason why we are where we are is because we are in this world of like, pretend DOM doesn't exist, and let's all these frameworks do all these things to hide DOM from you. And I think it is time where we just say, you know what, let's learn to love DOM for what all of its faults. It is what it is. And because if you embrace it and love it, you can take advantage of certain things that you can't right now, right? And we need to start thinking about like, what does it mean to bring these closures or listeners or all of these things? Like, how can we rearrange this particular problem so that we are not in this world where we have to download all the code at the very, very beginning, right? Because as long as you're going to be in that world, the websites are going to be slow. And oh, by the way, Google cares about this thing, right? Because they have this thing called page speed, which is basically rebranded Lighthouse. And they basically say like, hey, if you have 2 sites selling shoes and one will perform better on page speed than the other, then we will rank them on the search screen in that order, right? So now imagine you're an e-commerce website. You are now very incentivized to figure out how to make your site fast, because being fast is free advertisement, right? It is the thing that gets you to the top of the search results. And if you take most e-commerce websites today and you feed them into Google PageSpeed, you'll get like teens out of 100 scores. And these are just not good enough scores. Even if you take google.com and feed it into PageSpeed, you only get like 60 or 70 out of 100. And that kind of speaks a lot, right? That the situation of the industry is that we have a long way to go to improve. And anyways, that's the thing that I want to attack and see if we can budget and make websites that can get 100 out of 100 on Google scores.
So is the concept there that you would be focusing on the solution of delivering the UI, the button itself, like the visual of it in the DOM, and then solving the problem of bringing in the behavior of it later?
So the basic idea is, everybody does server-side pre-rendering. Yay, good job. But the problem is that when the server side comes to the client, I say the client has amnesia, right? Like it doesn't know anything. It doesn't know where the listeners are. Like it doesn't help that I've server side rendered a button when the button isn't interactive, right? And so you need to do some kind of a hydration step on a client. And the hydration step really means download all of the code you just had on a server, re-execute it so you could figure out where the listeners are and reattach the listeners. And that's a tremendous amount of work to be doing at the very, very beginning. And it's the thing that has to happen before your site can be interactive. And so more complicated the website becomes, the more amount of code you have to download and execute. And all of this thing is going to eat up your startup time. And so can we rearrange it so that the client doesn't have this amnesia, right? Can we rearrange it in a way where I can just ship code from the server in HTML form that already has the listeners attached to it? So there's nothing you have to do on a client, right? It is not until I go and I click on a buy button do I actually want to go and download the code necessary to process this particular code, right? It should be extremely lazy loadable, extremely just fine-grained, right? So that unless I actually interact with the page, I shouldn't have to download ridiculous amounts of JavaScript. And finally, when I do interact with the page, I shouldn't have to download the whole thing, right? I should only download the thing that I actually need to interact with. Is
this going to require another framework or a different architecture, or is it bring your own framework to the party?
It's as much as I would like it to be bring your own framework to the party. But there are some things that frameworks do that make this difficult. Again, I'm going to pick on listeners again. Like imagine you have a button that's a click listener, right? How exactly is your framework? I mean, the current frameworks say, oh, you just write some code that is associated with the click listener, right? And that click listener is actually placed inside of a template, which means the framework has to download the template and execute the template. And that actually gives it a sufficient amount of information to produce the listener that gets attached to the DOM, right? And as long as you're in this world where you have to download the template and attach it to the click listener, you're going to have a hard time doing this, right? So we need to kind of solve this particular problem, and it's going to require help from the frameworks as well. I think there are certain things that we can do on our magical side to make existing frameworks work. But if you want to take full advantage of this thing, I think you just have to look at the problem in a slightly different way than it was before. But I really don't want to make yet another framework. I think the world has enough of them. You don't need another one.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love about Angular is dependency injection. And so my mind immediately goes to, oh my gosh, does dependency injection still live in this environment, or do we lose it?
No, it does, but you have to kind of think about it a very different way, right? So one of the issue with DI is like, oh, I have a component that is a shopping cart, right? And into it, you have to inject the shopping cart service or something of that sort, right? The problem is, in order to render the shopping cart, you need to have a shopping cart component, and the constructor of it will go and inject the shopping cart service. So you're bringing everything in way too early, right? You need to kind of rearrange this and say like, no, I don't actually need the shopping cart until somebody actually clicks on it, right? So how do I rearrange the whole thing so that it's delayed as much as possible?
Yep, makes sense. Makes sense. So this is what you're tackling at BuilderIO?
This is what I'm tackling at BuilderIO, and I am super excited because this is like a whole new thing. I think there's going to be a couple of differences. One is that, with Angular, we kind of built it as an ivory tower. Like, we think this is what the world needs, and so we just kind of built it, right? And I think because we built it at the time when there were really no frameworks, there was a natural need, and people automatically would just gravitate to these solutions. I think with BuilderIO, it needs to be different in the sense that we need to start with the customers, right? And say like, look, you're existing customers, you have existing websites, you're using existing technology. Like, how do we help you achieve this stuff without blowing up everything underneath your feet? And because it is tied to a specific customer, it's not an ivory tower kind of a approach. I think it's going to have a lot more of a programmatic way of solving this particular problem. So I'm super excited about it. And I'm also super excited that Adam Bradley has joined us. Maybe you've seen that on the Twitter the other day. So excited to work with this guy. He's a legend in its own right. Mr. Ionic, it's amazing. I'm so super excited.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned earlier about exploring other things beyond just development, like company build out and things like that. Are those other things that you're getting to do here in this new venture?
Yeah. So I am kind of the CTO. I'm kind of the CTO. I mean, I'm the CTO.
I kind of.
Like just a little bit.
It's a startup, right? So the key things for the other role for me is trying to figure out how to design all internal systems so that they're scalable, right? So we have, I think we have 6 engineers right now. We are planning to hire, get the team to up to about 40. And so that's going to mean that a lot of internal systems have to be ready for that, right? And so how do you design your code bases? How do you design your processes, et cetera, to make sure that all these new people can come on board and they can be productive, right? The worst thing you want to have is bring all these people, and because the processes are not ready to support them, they're spending huge amounts of time fighting the system rather than actually going and building something cool for the customers. So I think it's a whole new thing for me to exercise and learn about and do, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm so looking forward to it. I've already kind of started in this direction, helping them in consolidating the repos and having better build system processes and so on. But I think a lot more of that will come.
And you have a little bit of test coverage in there as well?
Yes, we have test coverage and working on making the testing even easier. One of the things that I am being a stickler about is making sure that you have a developer environment where it's just easy to do. Like ideally, you just want to type code and hit enter or save, and your test immediately come back and say, pass or fail. If you can make that round trip super quick for the developers, then the developers can be productive, right? If you make it hard or difficult, then it's going to be hard and take forever to write tests, and not enough tests will be written. So by focusing on, how do we make the developers' environment easy and productive and, quick for quick turnaround, is how you kind of entice people to do the right thing naturally, right? It's always easier if people just naturally do stuff than it is when you force them by mandate. Like that never works.
And I'm sure you probably have a ton of your time wrapped up with all those things, but are you envisioning finding time to do more like blog posts and things like that to share knowledge more?
Yes, that is on the list. I've already got myself signed up for a whole bunch of conferences where we will be discussing this thing. I will definitely turn it in a bunch of blog posts, and we are going to do a lot of these things to kind of bring attention to this particular problem. People, as I said, like focus way too much on how fast it is to update a page once the framework is up and running. But I think the real thing to solve is how long does it take to bring the framework up? And even if you look at all of the comparison and benchmarks, etc., it's all in steady state by the time the jitter is up and warmed up and everything is fine and everything's downloaded. And now you're arguing like, is it framework A or framework B? Because this one is 3 milliseconds faster. Like it just doesn't matter, right? That's not what the issue is. The issue is that starting off these behemoths are so large that this is the thing to focus on.
Very
cool. So you're still going to be interfacing with the Angular community. This is not goodbye.
It's not a goodbye. I am still going to be interfacing with everybody, not just Angular community, all the communities, and say like, hey, this is the goal we need to have as an industry. And this is the direction we need to be heading. Like, what could you do in your frameworks to make this thing easier? Like, this is the destination where we need to get to, right? And these are the problems that need to be solved in these existing frameworks to get there.
All right, I've got a final question for you. It might be a little tough to answer, but looking back on Angular and everything that was there, is there one thing that you could look at, like this piece of code or this thing that it did that stands out that you're like, most excited about or most proud of?
It's a tough question, huh? I don't know. I think there is a lot of interesting bits inside of Angular. I think things like the fact that we integrated animations and the fact that we integrate internationalization and localization all into the framework, I think it kind of solves the holistic problem of building web applications. When I look at other solutions like React is beautifully simple, and there is something to be said for simplicity. And they're winning lots of hearts and minds because of the simplicity that they have. And simplicity is beauty. I'm not going to argue with that. However, once you want to add something like localization or internationalization, it is not as seamless as with Angular or animations, because the framework fundamentally doesn't understand these concepts, right? And adding it after the fact, it's doable, it's possible. It's just not as smooth and inclusive as it is in Angular. And I think it's nice to have all these frameworks that are extremely focused on one thing and they do one thing well, but they end up ignoring the bigger picture, right? And so I think building web apps is not just about templating. It's also about how do you get animation, how do you get styling, how do you get all the lazy loading in there, all these other pieces that currently the existing set of frameworks just don't. They basically say it's not our concern, which makes the frameworks easy to learn and nice to kind of get started with. But it is problems that eventually have to be solved by the application developer. And then these solutions end up being a bit of a kludgy and suboptimal, right? Why is it that we can't lazy load our style sheet just as well as we can lazy load our components, right? There's a lot of work that needs to be done in this thing to make it seamless and possible.
So really that whole concept of Angular becoming this platform of everything along with it, you get it and you get it all there, one-stop shop. Yeah. It has been, I think that's one of those things that really adhered it to the enterprise development. And a lot of, across the board is the fact that you go to one place and can get all those pieces, from that one source, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. Very
cool.
Cool.
I just remembered one thing we didn't talk about, and I wanted to kind of mention is that, I've been on Google for 16 years, and it's hard to even explain how long that is.
In the tech industry, it's a lifetime.
Yeah, when I started Google, I was not married. I, didn't have family. I didn't have kids. There's just so many things that were different. And so, there's never a good time to leave, but at some point, you're like, okay, let's try something different. And this is the time for me.
Yeah.
So excited. I am so excited.
I'm excited too. I'm excited that you're excited.
It's always great when everybody has
a movie. They say, "We'll watch your career with great interest." What movie is that from?
Star Wars.
There you go.
Was it Star Wars?
Yeah, the Emperor talking about Anakin.
Sorry, okay. Okay.
All right. Well, hey, Misko, thanks so much for not only sharing your time to come on this episode and talk with us and go down memory lane and then fill us in on all the exciting stuff that you've got going on and your new journey, but also for everything for the Angular community, for the Angular itself, all that stuff. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be part of it.
For sure.
By the way, this has been so interesting, but I feel bad because we have a bunch of people in the chat and I've seen so many really, really good questions, and we were just so interested in you. And I'm assuming that you have other places to be today, but if not, you're more than welcome to join us because we're going to go right now after this to our community hangout, like our post party over in Angular Nation. You've been there before, and there were so many good questions that we didn't even get to. So if you have time, it would be great if you could just hop over and answer some questions in the little post party hangout.
I can do a few minutes, yes.
Yay!
Awesome.
All right, we'll see you all there.
Thanks again. That was awesome. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you.